works, yeah, I'll try this. It works as a circle. So you've got legislation at the top, that's Parliament. They make a law. Then that goes to codes of practice and statutory frameworks. Well, what that means is the law is obviously in legalese, so that's for solicitors. So all that language will be then put into a practical document so that schools can actually do something with it. Then you have school policies. So schools have policies on absolutely everything. Now, say the school policy is on disability. So the legislation, then it goes to a practical language, goes to a school policy. Now, that school policy is enacted in school. You have to do it. And then we've got practice and procedure. So in other words, it's being done in schools. Now, we come up to here which says outcomes. Now, if there's a problem that seems to be universal, then maybe Parliament needs to make amendments. So it goes back to legislation, goes back to Parliament, and it's amended. So you will see when there is an act of Parliament, that's a law. For example, the Disability Discrimination Act 1995. So you know that came into being used in 95, and sometimes it's then added to, so it will have a different date. For example, I'm looking here at Sex Discrimination Act 1975, 1984, so it's been added to in 1984. So be careful with those amendments. Now, essentially, when you do this legislation, we've got Disability Discrimination, SEN Code of Practice, Sex Discrimination Act, which incidentally isn't in the book, so you have to look that one up. Children's Act 89, 2004, UN Convention, Every Child Matters, which you should know about now, and Race Relations Act. This is all to do with discrimination, and the Special Educational Needs Act 2001, SENDA. You will find all of this not just in the chapter. Louise Burnham, she covers this in the beginning on the first few pages, but I want you to look also at the index at some of the other pages, because that's got more information. Now, I've done this obviously myself. Now, pages 234, 235 crop up a lot. Page 81, 52, 53, 64, and so on. Look them up, because there are two things you need to be careful of. First of all, it talks here about the summary. The first column is legislation, code of practice, name and summary of key points. So the key points is obviously to do with, for example, Disability Discrimination Act. It prohibits discrimination against people with disability. It also requires reasonable adjustment to be made when providing facilities, which I've talked to you about. And then there are one or two other things. There's not a lot to write, essentially. It's only key points. But the other column, the far right column, it says how legislation guidance is implemented in our own sector of the children's workforce. In other words, how is this seen in schools? So, the first one, the Disability Discrimination Act 95, I would be putting in there children with disability are taught in tandem with able pupils, and the school has to be adapted with lifts, hearing loops, moving desks, sinks, widened doorways, ramps, etc. And policies put in place. All of them will have policies to be put in place. And that's it. That's the first one, Disability Discrimination Act. So if you work your way through that, one point, the Sex Discrimination Act, you will have to look that up. But essentially, it's talking about you can't be discriminated on gender, but also marriage. In the early, well, certainly 1900s up until really the 1950s, perhaps up to the Second World War, teachers were single. Same with nursing. Teachers had to be single. If you were married, you had to leave teaching or nursing. Why? Well, you had to look after your husband. And what's wrong with that, you may say? I know. So marriage was a problem, and equal opportunity. Well, when I was at school, when I first started teaching, most heads were men, and a lot of the senior ranks were all men. Well, that's completely changed now, and in fact it's gone almost the other way round. So it's quite possible for a child to go through primary school never having been taught by a man, which I don't think is a good idea. If we think about 203 and role models, say for children who've never seen a good role model for a man, and they're living in chaotic families where the husband or partner is alcoholic, drugs, violence, all that sort of stuff, gangs, you name it. Where can you find a decent male role model? And that's why it's important that you are a good role model in school. And the ones, the 203s I've been marking, some of the examples there that you've given of good role models from your lives have been really, really good, inspiring even, and I think that's really, really good. I know my father was a great inspiration in my life, and I was lucky, and a lot of kids aren't lucky. So that's sex discrimination. Of course, that's all changed now. Now there was one other which was the Race Relations Act. Yes, which prohibits discrimination. Now, certainly in the 50s and 60s in this country, this discrimination on race was rife. I'm afraid people of colour, no matter where, had a hard time, as did the Irish. And I certainly remember as a child going to London and seeing notices in windows of hotels, small hotels, saying no Irish, no blacks, and it was that bad. It really was terrible. You couldn't do that now, and nor should you. So the Race Relations Act of '76, it's quite late if you think about it. That protects children against this race discrimination, sets in place policies and procedures, and ensures every child is treated equally. And I think, in general, we've done pretty well on that. So Anyway, so that is the first worksheet. It shouldn't take you too long to do that. It's just a lot of going backwards and forwards and looking up stuff. So I'm going to stop now for this first one, and the second one I will do on 1, 2 and 1, 3, and then we'll look at worksheet 2. The great thing about this unit is it's pretty quick, so if you've been sort of bogged down a little bit with some of the other units, this is quite quick. And also remember, when you start 204, you've only got one unit to go after this, and you're well over halfway there. So I'll leave you here until the next video.